All right, great. So hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Aviva Stampfer, and I'm the Grants and Programs Director at Washington Women's Foundation. I'm your first point of contact for any questions about the letter of inquiry or the grant process. And today I'm joined by Catherine Gelband, this year's Collective Grants Chair, and Maddie Sandoval, a recent Washington Women's Foundation Merit Awardee. And today we're going to talk a little bit about what we do, why we do it, how we do it, and share. We'll have time also for any questions that you may have as well. So we'll present information for about 30 minutes and save the second 30 minutes for your questions. So save those questions for the end. And I'll stick around if you have any other questions that you'd rather answer, not in front of the whole group. Before we dig in, though, and start with the official PowerPoint and all that, it's always good to know who's in the virtual room. So if you want to take a moment and introduce yourselves in the chat, you can share your name and the organization you're here representing, and get a sense of who is here with us today. And there's folks who are new to us, and hey, Jarrell, nice to see you. You got Will as well, and Sierra. Oh, it's all coming in now. Fantastic. Welcome, Catherine. Hi, Madison and Sarah. Love this. Part of why we do this is so that you can see who else is here, your fellow nonprofit colleagues, because we know that you are all working hard and might not have a chance to connect with each other as well. Great to see some folks that I know and meet some new folks too. Thank you all so much for being here. Keep them coming. All right, I think we're probably ready to dive into the presentation, Catherine. You can just start with the second slide. We'll get going. All right, so who are we? We are, oops, and then my slide went away. There we go. Washington Women's Foundation is a little bit different from other funders. We believe in the power of collective giving, which means that our funding comes from contributions of our 320 plus members. Our vision focuses on two things: how we can help our members be better philanthropists, and how we can do it as a collective. Everything we do is focused on that grant making and on education at the same time. Our mission states that Washington Women's Foundation is a strong and inclusive collective of informed women who together influence community transformation. And we do this through our individual and collective learning, through high impact grant making, and by listening and respecting all voices in our community. Our grant making model is inclusive, hands-on, and community driven. We believe our members learn more by pooling not just their financial resources, but also their intellectual capital. Each member really brings unique experiences, networks, perspectives, and insights to the process. And our grant committee acts as the due diligence team for the entire membership. So it's a subset of members. Any member can join that grant committee and is welcome to serve on any work group. And what that means and why it's relevant for you all as you consider your LOI is that the group of reviewers is a mix of people with both deep knowledge about each issue area and people completely new to the issue. We can go to the next slide. So many of you may have heard that we made some big changes to our grants recently, and we want to just take a moment to express gratitude to the many nonprofits who shared their input during the refresh process. This is our third year. We're going into our third year of this new structure, and we'll continue to adapt based on feedback from members and organizations who participate, and look forward to your continued feedback along the way. So we now have 6 big themes to focus our grant making, and we plan to explore 3 themes a year, covering all 6 themes over the course of 2 years. We're hoping that by focusing on just 3 themes a year, we'll have the space to dive deeper into the issues. So our even year themes you see on the screen here are law, justice, and incarceration, housing and hunger, and arts and community culture. And on the next slide, you'll see that the odd year themes are healthcare, climate and agricultural justice, and education. So within each theme, we have a priority to further focus our learning and our grade making. And in order to identify these priorities, we held a learning event called The Convening with 3 panels of great thinkers on each of the 3 themes. Maybe some of you were there. After the convening, we surveyed the entire Washington Women's Foundation community, both members, nonprofits, folks who are interested in the work, and asked for suggestions on what are the most critical priorities in our big themes for this coming year in 2024: law, justice, incarceration, housing and hunger, and arts and community culture. Maybe you filled out that survey after coming to the convening. From that survey, staff put together a slate of the most common suggestions, and then our members voted and selected a priority within each theme. So now I'm going to go over a little bit more deeply what those priorities are for 2024. So all funding and learning at Washington Women's Foundation in 2024 is aligned on these 3 priorities. I think you can see them on the next slide. And that includes, by the way, the Women and Girls grants, which I can share more about later if you're interested. Our goal is in structuring the selection process this way is that the funding priorities are responsive and come from the broad Washington Women's Foundation community. So here are our priorities for 2024. Within the priority of arts and community culture, the membership selected expanding access to arts in schools. So we have defined this as investing in the integration of arts in school settings and expanding access to arts for students in grades K through 12. We are interested in learning more about the benefits of and barriers to arts education in Washington State, as well as the impact of expanded access to arts in a K-12 setting. And within the housing and hunger theme, the membership has selected mental health and housing, which you might think sounds familiar, and that's because it is the same priority that we focused on in 2022. We learned a lot at that point in 2022 about mental health and housing, the complexity of that specific intersection in our state, and have developed an updated definition to try to respond to some of what we learned in 2022 and be more specific about what we're looking for. So for mental health and housing, we're hoping to invest in culturally relevant mental health and addiction recovery services for people who lack stable housing, including organizations with counseling staff and/or those working with a network of external providers. We're interested in learning more about the systemic intersections of housing instability and mental health, including addiction. And finally, within the theme of law, justice, and incarceration, the membership selected re-entry support for our priority. We are hoping to invest in specific types of support that individuals leaving incarceration need to thrive. We're interested in learning more about the unique challenges individuals leaving incarceration face and how re-entry support can assist them holistically in this transition, in turn improving their experience and reducing recidivism. So those are our priorities for 2024. Let's see. Next, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the logistics. So in addition to making those changes on theme, we adapted our process as well. And again, in response to feedback from both members and nonprofits. So the grant process for nonprofits begins with the letter of inquiry, which opened in late October and will close on December 8th. You'll notice that slide is incorrect. We didn't get a chance to update that. LOIs are then reviewed by member committees who choose 10 in each priority to move on to the research stage. Member committees will do research on all 10 organizations and ultimately choose 5 in each priority, so 15 organizations total, that move on to the conversation stage. And the 15 organizations that don't move on at that stage will receive a small grant of $1,500 each. I wanted to pause and tell you a little more about the research phase here because it is somewhat unique and it replaces the proposal stage that we've had in years past. So we no longer ask organizations to submit a full proposal and instead have opted to do our own research. And at the beginning of our research phase, we offer applicants the opportunity to share any existing materials they have on hand, like a proposal from a different funder or an annual report or a YouTube video that really expresses the work, anything that you might have on hand, just asking you not to create anything new for us. And then we conduct a training for our members so that they know exactly what they're expected to do, how to do that research, and work together to do that research itself. And the goal here is really to limit the burden on grant applicants. We've heard for years that our proposal had been a heavy lift, and we were very excited to take on this change and learn more about your organizations ourselves. We continue to learn a lot through that process. So we've done it for 2 years now like this, and this will be our 3rd year. And while, of course, yes, it was a challenging shift for our grant committee, in the end, we realized that we got to know organizations on a much different level than we did with formal proposals. So it's been successful. Next, we have conversations with organizations. And this is essentially a site visit, but can be designed however each organization would like. And our hope is that these conversations are truly a place of dialogue and mutual understanding. Organizations and members have those conversations in April, and based on those conversations, 2 organizations in each priority are chosen to move on to the final vote stage. And the organizations that don't move on at that stage receive a $3,000 grant. The final step of the process is the vote. All 6 finalists, so 2 in each priority, are offered a $5,000 restricted leadership and self-care grant. This is the only restricted grant we have at Washington Women's Foundation, and it comes from our desire to really invest in the capacity of nonprofits. These grants are intended to support leadership, which can be interpreted in whatever way it works for you. It could be your executive director, but also emerging leaders in the organization as they work on personal or organizational capacity building, training, and self-care. This grant is optional, so if it feels more burdensome to have a restricted grant, organizations don't have to accept it, but historically, folks do accept it and do great things with it, which is wonderful. And then the vote proceeds as it typically does, with one key difference, which is that all 6 organizations receive a grant. The top vote getters each receive $100,000, and then the remaining 3 receive $25,000. For the $100,000 grant, we allow organizations to take it over multiple years if they prefer, and whatever disbursement plan works best for the organization. So then the women and girls grants are awarded in the late fall. We're in the middle of our process right now, and they use the same pool of LOIs that are submitted for collective grants. The goal here is to align all of our giving, all of our grant making, under the same priorities. In order to be considered for these grants, all you have to do is check the box on the LOI that indicates your interest and share a little bit more about that part of your work in the supplemental question. I now want to share a bit of an update on the advocacy grant. In response to feedback from nonprofits and Washington Women's Foundation members, the advocacy grant program is on hiatus for the 2024 grant cycle. This decision is not made lightly, and importantly, should not be interpreted as a lack of commitment to advocacy. And I say that because it's quite the opposite. We are really committed to deepening our understanding of advocacy and understanding both what it could look like for us to be engaged more deeply and fund in advocacy in a more effective way. We're trying to figure out what our role is, and to that end, we're going to bring together a task force to wrestle with some of those deep questions, both around our understanding of advocacy and our role within it. If you are interested in advocacy work and want to be part of this discussion, let me know, reach out. We feel it's essential to engage nonprofits in how we decide to move forward, and welcome your engagement. We don't totally know what that will look like now because this is a late breaking thing that was just decided this month. But let me know and we'll make sure to keep you in the loop. All right, so the next slide you'll see has a full timeline for our grant making process. It's on our website as well, so don't feel like you have to take a look. I know it's very small text. And I also want to note that, of course, it is now out of date because the decision to put advocacy on hold was just made. All right, so now that we've gone over the process a bit, I want to make some time to talk about the criteria. So in 2019, we implemented a new grant criteria focused on increasing equity and reducing disparities in Washington state. We've learned a lot over the last few years and have adapted our criteria to incorporate feedback from both our members and organizations like yours that went through the process in all of those years. And if you're curious, we put through a series of blog posts to share the changes that we've made to the criteria from year to year. Check that out on our website. So we use Philanthropy Northwest's definition of equity, which is that equity is the condition that would be achieved if one's identity no longer predicted how one fared in life. And we define disparities as differences in life experiences, life outcomes, and the distribution of society's benefits and burdens determined by a person's race, gender identity, and or other characteristics historically linked to discrimination and or exclusion. I put the full criteria on the slide, and it's also on the website. I encourage you to read the frequently asked questions on our website, as well as the definitions document. And if you're interested in reading about past grantees, you can view a complete list there as well. If you have other questions about the criteria that you see here on your screen, we'll definitely have time to dive into it a little bit more later on the call today. So the next slide you'll see has the LOI questions themselves. Maybe you've already logged into Reviewer and you've started, so you've seen them, but I did want to make sure to share them in advance because the LOI questions line up directly with the 4 elements of grant criteria that you just saw on the slide before. And the criteria is what the reviewers will use in their assessment of your LOI, trying to see how well does your organization fit with our grant criteria. The last thing I want to cover is the type of funding we offer. So one of the questions we get a lot, less so now, but in the past, is do you award general operating support? And our answer is yes, absolutely. We do this because we've listened to our grantees. We know it is the most desired type of funding. And we also do this because we believe in our expertise of our grantees and trust their leadership and decision-making. You know what's working, what's not. You know what your communities need and how to best address those needs. We believe that organizations should be given the flexibility to innovate, take strategic risks, test hypotheses, experiment, learn from failures, and grow, all with the support of funders. We also believe that professionals who work at nonprofits should have livable wages, benefits, professional and leadership development, and up-to-date technology, and that's all part of general operating support. We no longer fund specific projects or capital requests. Instead, all grants will be unrestricted support of an organization as a whole. We want to understand your community's needs and how you are addressing those needs. You can, of course, still use those funds for a specific project or a capital campaign. The main difference on our end is that we won't ask you about it, how you plan to use those funds specifically. Another change we made is that grantees no longer need to wait 5 years before applying again. We used to have that restriction. We no longer do. And we do have a few eligibility requirements. Excuse me, I have a little bit of a cough. We fund 501c3 or fiscally sponsored organizations with a presence in Washington State, whose impact can be felt within Washington State. We typically do get more LOIs from the Puget Sound area. However, we are working to make sure that we take geography into consideration in our discussions because we understand issues around lack of access to funding outside of the Puget Sound region. We don't fund pass-through scholarships or contribute to endowments, and we don't fund organizations that discriminate on any basis. So that's a little bit about the limitations there. Next up, I'm delighted to pass the mic over to Catherine Gelband, our fearless leader, the Collective Grant Committee Chair, to share a little bit about what it's like from a member perspective going through the process. And I think, I think we could stop screen sharing so that we could see Catherine a little bit better. Thank you. Thank you, other Catherine.
There are several Catherines on this call. Thank you, Aviva. It is my pleasure to be here today. I have been a member of the Washington Women's Foundation for 10 years, 9 of which I have participated in the collective grant process. And I have really learned the growth and the learning I have had through my participation in the collective grant process, particularly these last 3 years as we apply the new grant criteria. I think we as a collective are learning together and are continuing to challenge one another, which is a really exciting opportunity for all of us. Just wanted to give you a little bit of my perspective as a member of a collective grant committee as we review particularly the LOIs, since that's what you will be undertaking first. Each working group, as Aviva said, is composed of co-leaders and then somewhere between 10 and 15 members of Washington Women's Foundation. And they are women from all ages, backgrounds, cultures, professions. Some of them have been doing this for years. Some of them are brand new members. So there's a wonderful collaboration in terms of skill set and experience, and a real sense of supporting one another as we try to understand as well as we can the issue area of the year. The way that we have now structured the meetings is at the first meeting, we will usually take some time to all read the LOIs in that subject area before that first meeting, and just talk about what are the issues we're seeing coming up, what are the definitions we might need to agree on as a group. Last year in early childhood education, it was as simple as, is early childhood education start in, can it include grade school, or should it start earlier than that and maybe extend into grade school? So all of those are questions that we agree on in that first meeting. And that's a really helpful way for all of us to understand how we're looking at the issue area that we'll be working with that year. As I said, we're all expected to read all of the LOIs, but then we break down into reading pairs to review each of the LOIs that are then presented to the committees. So that is as simple as math. You know, if there are 50 LOIs in an area and there are 10 work group members, and we're all going to have 5 to review or 10 to review if we're going to work in pairs. So there's a very, what we are working from at that point is really the information that you have given to us in the LOI. So we might do a cursory review of the website, but I would really encourage you to look at the information you are presenting in the LOI and think of your audience not necessarily as a grants program manager, but instead as a neighbor or a potential new donor, and explain your work and its impact and how you are intentionally addressing the issue that we are looking at, as well as how you're intentionally addressing those racial or gender disparities, because that's such an important thing for us to be able to focus on. We have 2 meetings to review all of the LOIs, and the readers present the information, and then the group discussion really focuses on questions, clarifications, interpretations, and it's a really rich learning time for us, because with each LOI, we learn a little bit more about the subject area. And as we share our reviews, it's really an opportunity to start to think about how we might be able to get down to that final 10 that will move on to the research phase. The discussion, as I said, is really based on the LOI. And so we also, we don't evaluate how well the LOI is written. We remind ourselves often that not every organization has a professional grant writer, but it's really just the clarity with which we can understand the work that your organization does. That's the most important takeaway for us from the LOI. Last year, I just want to give you a quick example of one of the grant award winners. Aviva, is that okay if I go into the, okay, great. Last year, I advised the early childhood education working group, and ultimately the organization that was chosen by the membership was Communities of Rooted Brilliance. Community of Rooted Brilliance focuses on children ages 0 to 5, and they have learning programs that are really importantly culturally and linguistically matched in their home visiting services. They started out serving immigrants from Burma and then expanded that reach. So now they work with children ages birth through 5 from a variety of backgrounds and languages, mostly from Angola, Afghanistan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Iraq, Rwanda, Syria, Yemen. And their goal is to create communities that no longer need their assistance. And so they really grow they grow leaders with their work. And I think one of the ways that they successfully achieve that is by listening. They are always in conversation with all of the people they serve, because that is how they make sure that people's voices are honored. Their accountability really comes from encouraging those local members to become leaders, and they really work with families to understand their rights within the U.S. education system and how they can have a voice. And so that is just a really important part of their work, and something that really impressed us. We were also really impressed by the fact that 75% of their staff represent communities that they serve. They are clearly working with communities affected by inequity. They have really clearly defined goals, and they work to build power within the community they serve. And so they were just a very impressive organization. And as is always the case with organizations, that any of the organizations that apply, it's so impressive. And we were so grateful for the time that they took to work with us during the conversation phase to help us learn more about their work. But it is a learning process for us. And so we just look forward to reading all of your LOIs and learning more about your work this year. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much, Catherine. I know it's helpful to hear what it's like from someone who does actually read your LOI and is very thoughtful about it. So thank you. Next, I'm delighted to introduce you all to Maddie Sandoval from the Foundation for the Youth Resiliency and Engagement, also known as FIRE. And Maddie's going to share a little bit about it, what it's like to go through this process from the nonprofit perspective. And let me spotlight you as well. There you are.
Thanks, Aviva.
Oh, and sorry, Maddie. Feel free to share a little bit about FIRE as well, because folks might not be aware of all the awesome things you're doing.
Sure. Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Maddie Sandoval. I use she, her pronouns, and I am located in rural Okanagan County, so North Central Washington. I co-founded and am a co-director of FIRE Youth Center. So again, we're in Okanagan County. That is the largest county by landmass in Washington State. We're incredibly rural, and we're also the only youth center in our entire county. So we offer wraparound care, and we do everything from after-school programming to teen pregnancy prevention, substance use disorder, legal systems advocacy, like the whole shebang. And so yeah, here to just share about our experience with this grant and what that process was like. FIRE, we're in a super low income area. I think we have one of the highest child poverty rates in Washington State. And so our organization is over 90% grant funded, and that is just projected to be our reality indefinitely. And so we write a lot of grants. I will say that this Washington Women's Foundation is one of the longer grant processes that I've ever been a part of, but I will say that that does mean they just put a lot of care and attention towards it. And they also do a lot of that heavy lifting, like Aviva was saying. So there's like the research phase where really you're just submitting information like your website or maybe videos that you have or social media accounts, and they're compiling information for you. Which is huge in grant writing. Usually you're pulling all that information yourself and condensing it and trying to make a perfect story, but to have someone come in and really pull that information for you and then come back and say, is this correct? Am I capturing this right? How can we alter this? So I guess a tip would be, if you have a website, if you have things that are like outstanding, just making sure that they're updated. We were super fortunate that we had just done a full website revamp about the time that we were applying for this, which meant all of our information was more up to date. Our links were working. The robustness of our service was like accurately, I think, accounted for on our website. So I would definitely say that if you have little social media videos or images of your work and what that looks like and feels like, I think that helps paint a really good story. For us in grants like this that are focused on like equity and addressing social disparities, we work on storytelling a lot. And living in a rural area, we tend to be underrepresented in grant opportunities, things like that. And so for us, we like try and tell a story of like, what does it look like, feel like, sound like when you come to Okanagan County? Like, what are the hurdles we're up against, and how are we approaching these things, and where are we stuck, and where do we need support? And then also, I just appreciated the conversation phase too, getting to meet with a board member and staff to do I think also some mutual accountability. So they're asking you questions, but I think it's really important as someone applying for grants to ask questions too about, how are you doing this work? Do you fund rural areas? Tell me more about that. And so I think really trying to be transparent with each other of like, what are my concerns? What are things I've seen in the past? What am I really excited about? What do I hope that you are walking away from this conversation with? Asking if there are areas that you can strengthen your application or where they need more clarity. How can I offer that? So those were some of the things I have notes on, but I would just say it's actually a really lovely process. I appreciate the questions. For some of you, I think there's like this new wave in grant applications too, where a lot of folks are rethinking how they do the grant application process and what questions they're asking. So if you've applied to places like Empire Health Foundation or Group Health Foundation, you might see some similarities in the questions being asked, which is also really great to be able to pull from that. Yeah, and I think just wishing you all an abundance of luck and yeah, that's a positive experience for you too. Anything else you want me to cover, Aviva?
No, that was fantastic. I think it's good just to get a perspective of what it's like to go through the process, and I appreciate the honesty about the experience. I think it's really helpful. So thank you so much, Maddie. Okay, so now we have time for questions that you have. So feel free to unmute and ask your question or put it in the chat, whatever you're comfortable with, and we have a good amount of time for your questions, so we can probably get to them all.
I have a question.
Yes, please, go ahead.
So I have not looked closely at the letter of inquiry requirements. Is there and I have written federal grants, so I know with that there's limitations that we must adhere to, like it could be so many pages, or it has to be in a certain font with margins specific. Are those the kind of details that are also included in the letter of inquiry instructions?
Great question, Ellen. We are not like a federal grant. And man, I should talk to them. No, I'm just kidding. The LOI really has just those 4 questions that you saw earlier in the slideshow. Those are the 4 narrative questions, and then just some basic information like your website, your executive director, your budget size, that kind of stuff that you would probably expect to see on most applications. You'll see for the narrative portion, there's a suggested word count, but we actually set it up so it's not going to cut you off, because that's just so annoying to me. So, of course, the goal is for it to be a light lift for you, just 4 questions. Hopefully it doesn't take over your day or your week. And also keeping it relatively brief helps our grant committee as well, so that, because they're reviewing, like Catherine was talking about, quite a few LOIs. They really do read all of them and then dive deeper into a subset of them. So the goal is for it to be short, both for you and for the grant committee members, but don't stress too much about the word count itself. It will not cut you off.
And then subsequently to that, so if the letter of inquiry is accepted, if you will, then what is the next step?
Yeah. So the next step is the research phase. So there's no formal proposal. We just reach out to organizations. We'll let you know either way your status. We'll find out. The selection process will wrap up mid-February, so we'll let everyone know mid-February, and then ask organizations that are moving forward to the research stage what they might suggest we start with as far as the research. So, if you have on hand an annual report or a TED Talk, or hey, we really don't use our website, it's not up to date, but we keep our LinkedIn super up to date, look there, tips like that to help us in the research. And last year, and we probably will do this again this year, last year we asked for a budget as well, just in any format, whatever budget you have on hand, just to give us a sense of the financials as well. And then the grant committee, we do train them on, how to read nonprofit financials, and what we focus in on is a budget, and then the 990, since that's what's publicly available for most nonprofits.
So include, thank you. So include
Yeah.
in the letter of inquiry, is there a requirement to include what quantity of funds is being requested and what specifically they would be used for?
No,
Oh,
no questions on that.
wow.
The grant amount is set, so the grant amount is $100,000.
Okay.
And then since it's all unrestricted, we're really looking to understand the work of the organization as a whole, as opposed to what you plan to use it for.
Okay.
Yeah. No, thank you for the questions.
Yes, thank you.
Absolutely.
I've got a good list here.
Go for it.
First of all, thank you for such a gracious grant making process. We're really used to lengthy proposals and word counts and all the different things that Ellen talked about. So how thoughtful of you guys to kind of just do the LOI and then take all the heavy lifting on your end. I've never experienced anything like that before. So thank you for that.
Oh, that's kind.
So, first question, have you guys granted to any faith-based organizations before? Is that something that's in your realm?
Great question. Yeah, so the sort of eligibility piece around that is you know, if there is a requirement for a specific faith test, as some people call it, around employment or board service. So if there is no requirement around a faith test for anyone who's engaging with the organization, either, you know, for in order to receive services or to serve on leadership, whether it's board or staff, you know, basically if services are open to all without any faith requirements, you're good to go. Otherwise, probably not, but we could always chat through if you're concerned. Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Next question, when you guys do want to see a budget, I'm assuming it would be for the upcoming year, 2024.
Yeah, whatever you have
Okay.
on hand. We know that organizations have different fiscal years. So
Sure.
you might be in the process of working on a budget. You might have just wrapped up a budget. So whatever gives us, you know, in your opinion, a good sense of where the organization is at financially. And
Okay.
if it gets to that point, you can always sort of troubleshoot. Would it be this or that kind of thing?
Okay.
Yeah.
And then my last question, I see that you guys are very focused and interested in racial and gender disparities. We do recovery housing, so we are very open to anybody who's coming to us that's seeking recovery. So that could be, you know, our motto around here is, if you know, we don't care if you're purple, if you're seeking recovery and you are a good fit for our housing, then you're coming in to stay at Truly Motivated. So we know that addiction doesn't discriminate. It is a wide favor of all peoples and walks of life. So but we also know that people suffering from addictions go through a lot of disparities and stigma because of their substance use disorder. So I guess my question is, we're not necessarily focused on racial and gender issues. We're focused on serving people who are going through substance use disorder recovery, rehousing. Everybody in our program has some type of mental health diagnosis that just kind of comes part and parcel with substance use disorder. So I can see that is a major focus for you guys. So are the disparities that our folks are facing, because we're serving a wide variety of all different types of peoples, would we still be a consideration, or does it really need to be focused in those specific areas?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think it's relevant really for all issue areas that we talk about. And I will say that we are really focusing in on race and gender identity disparities. And the reason for that is just having come to understand that discrimination and inequities due to race and gender identity are, you know, really leading factors in determining a lot of different disparities that we know and we all care deeply about. And so it's hard because a lot of organizations do serve everyone, right? And I think what we're and I'll invite Catherine to share a little bit of her thoughts as well, but what we're trying to understand is are your services designed or intended to serve folks with that specific lens, you know, and you also are open to all? or is it really just one size for everyone, and bringing that lens of racial equity and serving people who are impacted by inequities due to gender identity as well, is that part of how you put together your services, if that makes sense? I feel like
No,
I'm
it's
not
a good
speaking
answer.
very clearly.
No, it's a good answer.
Yeah.
It's a great answer.
Catherine, do you have other elements of that you want to share just from your experience?
I think well, first of all, I think one of the things that we always struggle with as on a committee is we get organizations that are doing amazing work, but serve everyone and don't really try to intentionally address a racial or gender inequity. And so that is always hard because people love organizations and the work they're doing, but within that grant criteria, they don't fit. And so I think what we are looking for most often is the word I use most often when I'm working with a committee is intention. Are they intentionally addressing a racial or gender inequity? And I think those are the words I use for guidance.
Okay, those are good answers. Thanks.
Thank you, Catherine. And thank you for the question. Really appreciate it.
I have not a question, but a comment about that as well. In addressing racial and gender inequities or disparities, it's always interesting to me, depending upon where the location of the services are and the organizations that are applying. For example, if there's an organization that's coming out of King County where racial and gender issues might be more prominent just by population alone, let's say compared to even Thurston County or like Pacific County, where the racial breakdown, if you will, is dramatically different. How would that affect trying to respond to the focus of addressing those issues or inequalities? I mean, when you have a county that is, 85%, let's say, Caucasian or 90% Caucasian, compared to, again, let's say Pierce County or King County, how would that work in addressing the review, if you will, of the letter of inquiry? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a good point. Since we are a statewide funder, we are looking at the variety of experiences across our state. And I mean, I feel like we're lucky to have Maddie here who knows Okanagan County so well and knows what communities of color in Okanagan County experience. So I think if you want to share, Maddie, you're welcome to. You don't have to. But what I would say to that comment and question is really kind of the same thing as what Catherine was saying, is about that intentionality. Regardless of the size of the population, is there intentionality around addressing what we know to be the experiences of communities that are impacted by inequity due to race or gender identity? There's it might look different in different counties than it does in King or Pierce County, but we know it's still happening. And we want to approach it with that same focus on intentionality.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Excuse me. Let's see. Okay. Thank you for the question in the chat, Sarah. Sarah wrote, if our mission is not focused on one of the 3 themes, but we are equity centered, but we have a project that matches a theme, should we apply? So I think make sure I'm understanding the question, it's some sort of that's not the focus of the whole organization, but it's maybe a project within the organization. Is that right?
Yes, we're a STEM focused organization, STEM in general, kind of educational equity focused organization, but we have an arts education focused project. It's just not, arts is not highlighted in our mission.
Got it. Yeah. It's another really good question, one that comes up for us quite a bit, honestly. And again, Catherine would invite your comments. But just to start us off, I would say that this is a tension to shifting to unrestricted funding, right? We know unrestricted funding is the way to go. We are not going to change that anytime soon. And it means that organizations that do a lot of different things, actually like fire as well, sometimes have a hard time figuring out exactly where to fit in. And I know that we are not the only funder that presents this problem. So we're thinking about it. It's on our minds. We're trying to figure it out. But I would say, I would still say apply if you feel like that program is a good fit, and that the organization, when you look at that criteria, and especially when you think about the accountability piece and the demonstration piece, like that you're able to make a strong case for the strength of the organization fit, and then the strength of the program fit to the priority. I don't know, you might disagree, Catherine, but I welcome your thoughts.
I agree. I would apply. And I think that there is, Aviva described, it's just a tension for the committee. There are 15 women who are representing 375 members, and we take that responsibility very, very seriously in our evaluation and thinking about an organization that has a project that would then receive general operating. That's a tension that we pay attention to, but also we have granted for projects that are just incredibly innovative and just fall right within that criteria, even though it's just a project of a larger organization. So I think we can find that work really intriguing, and also kind of groundbreaking sometimes, because it's come from a learning of a big organization about an issue area, and its importance. And so that can be very compelling for the committee.
Absolutely. Thanks for the question, Sarah. Other questions? Susan, yes, I see your hand.
There we go. This is fabulous. I'm just enjoying this so much. Oh, so inspirational. So I'm on the board of a brand new 501c3 that is providing scholarships to specific to Bremerton High School, which my sons both went to. They were some of the few that went on to college, and we've awarded we're funding it ourselves. We just got the 501c3 the last 2 years. We've funded 4 African-American students to help them get to college, and they're all first generation. So by first generation kids that have gone to college in their families, is a pass-through scholarship then, and I know this isn't the funding focus for this coming year. I'm new on this. Sure. So pass-through scholarships means we would not be able to come to you saying, oh, can you help us fund these scholarships? That's my first question. Is that correct?
Right. So the funding
pass-through scholarship means just what it sounds like.
Yeah. So
okay.
we would not
okay.
fund a scholarship.
Our second mission that's a little longer term is, because we have a small board, but we have some incredibly, like this CFO of a big Seattle company is on our board. And we have one of our students is in Portland State studying accounting and wants to go into finance. And, we've reached out to her. Would you, the student, like to connect with this person? And she's like, I wouldn't know how to do that. So we are very aware that we want to start some sort of a mentoring program, because we don't want this to be one and done. We want to follow these kids all the way through their done college. They can join our board, they can be impact people. And so would building out a mentoring portion be something that you might be interested in funding?
Yeah,
I know that's very general, but I'm just, you don't even have to give a long answer to that, because we need, as a board, to come up with more thoughts on what that would look like and what the funding would be. But
sure. Yeah, I would never want you to, I want you to, your community, right? So if you want to do a mentoring program, go for it, but don't do it because
Yeah.
I would say that it's hard to know what the priorities will be next coming years
Sure.
because of that process that I laid out earlier. So
Yep.
it could end up being a focus within education, for
Yep.
example, in 2025, but there's no way to know at this
Yeah,
point.
that's fine.
Yeah, but
Thank you.
that would qualify from an eligibility perspective because it's not specifically the scholarship.
I'm enjoying all of this. Thank you so
Oh,
much.
fantastic. Thank you for the question. Okay, I saw a couple questions in the chat. So Alyssa shared Essentials First provides hygiene supplies to folks who otherwise can't afford them, soap, toothpaste, and so on. These basic supplies, which aren't provided by WIC, EBT, or food banks, are fundamental to the ability to access and maintain employment, education, and protect against bullying, and therefore mental health and housing. We offer services in 8 languages and focus heavily on immigrant and refugee communities. Should we apply? Gosh, Melissa, it's hard to know off the top of my head here. Maybe we could talk offline a little longer if you'd like, and get into a little bit more. I think that really, we could talk a little more, but my answer would be that if you take a look at the priority and see, yes, we're a super strong fit with that priority, and you look at the criteria, and yes, we're a strong fit with the criteria, absolutely apply. And we can talk a little more if you'd like.
Thank you. Apologies for the overly specific. I appreciate it.
No, that's fine. It's fine. Sometimes you have a specific question. I see some questions in the chat and a question or hand raised. So why don't we go to the hand raised and then back to the chat? So go ahead, Andy.
Thank you very much. I have I think hopefully just a quick question about question number 3 for the letter of intent regarding describing how your organization addresses the systemic inequities. For that question, we provide scheduled legal aid, a lot of services, post-conviction, restorative justice related. Do you want us to go to define the problem like in detail, or should we have an assumption that some of the people reviewing the grant have an understanding of the barriers and problems are, and then focusing on the solutions? So I guess my question is, do you want us to focus on an explanation of some of the problems faced by individually and then the solutions, or do you just want us to briefly mention the problems and then focus on solutions?
So it's a good question. I would probably lean towards briefly describe the problem and then get into solutions, mostly because I know these are really complex problems and you could probably write a book, right? You know this work really well. We do our best to educate ourselves on what's happening in our communities. So we did that convening where Catherine and I are working on this and 101 sessions to bring more speakers in to help us understand these specific priorities. And then we pull together resources as well so that our members can educate themselves. So I feel like I don't want to take up all your time explaining to us, but at the same time, there are members with a real wide range of understanding that are going to be reading that. So if you can take a little bit of time to explain sort of your perspective on that, and that might help ground our understanding of how the specific services you provide address some of those systemic inequities. I think that could be a good approach. Catherine, do you want to chime in on any of that as well?
No, I agree. I think that that's exactly the approach I would take. Just a short description and then much more about the way you address it.
No, thank you both very much.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Okay. All right, so we have another question here in the chat from Miran. Hi, Miran. Sorry for the specific question. I'm having trouble knowing which funding priority to apply for on behalf of Choose 180, since we do offer a lot of programming around reentry support, which includes our mental health program. There's overlap in our work across your different funding areas. Should we articulate that or try to stick with one specific area? Yeah, it's a good question. I would say as much as you can, stick to the area that you've selected. You'll see in the LOI, you can really only pick one. I think that this is an intersection and an overlap that you are not alone in. I've talked to some other folks about it as well. And it's super fascinating. And I think it will become even more clear what that overlap looks like as far as services as we get into this and dive deep ourselves. So we can talk more if you'd like, but for now I would say try to stick with one specific area if you can. Okay, thank you. All right. Nellie asked if we are able to access the presentation later, and Catherine answered helpfully that yes, we're recording it and we'll send it out later this week. And we can send out the PowerPoint slides as well, if that's helpful. Great, good questions, everyone. Anything else on your mind in the last 2 minutes we have together? Okay. Well, maybe we'll let you go a little early, and thank you again for your time today. I hope it's been helpful. If you have specific questions that were not answered, feel free to reach out anytime. I'll pop my email in the chat. It's also on the website. So feel free to reach out if you would like additional assistance of any kind, and we look forward to reading your LOIs. Thank you all so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Take care.
See.